The Jurassic World movies have been trying to push this weird narrative that people aren't excited about dinosaurs anymore since the first World movie. I'd generously describe this as a bold move considering the main reason anyone even goes to watch these movies and buy all the toys and video games and t-shirts and comic books and merchandise is because people are still really stoked to see dinosaurs. But what if someone saw this downward trend in dinosaur interest and decided to be a bit too pedantic about it when making their own theme park? Hi, I'm FishStickOnAStick. I'm extremely pedantic, and today I decided to find out if I can make a 5-star Jurassic Park without any dinosaurs in Jurassic World Evolution 2. When I posted this as an option for a poll, people were wondering if that meant I wouldn't have any animals in the park at all, or if I'd just be pedantic and only count pterodactyls and stuff. And in my smug sense of superiority and self-righteousness, I looked down on these laymen and said, do you really think I'd miss out on an opportunity to be pedantic about paleontology? Also, they're referred to as pterosaurs, not pterodactyls, and then I blasted them all into goo with my superior brain powers. Now, I'm sure the biggest question on everyone's minds is, why am I doing this in Jurassic World Evolution 2? The third game's been out for a few months now. Well, a few reasons. The main one being that Jurassic World Evolution 3 does not currently have a custom challenge mode setting at the time of this video. There are only challenge mode maps that have set goals and function a bit like the missions from JPOG. I'm honestly kind of surprised that for 3 games in a row now, we've launched without a custom challenge mode. Maybe I'm the only one who ever plays it, I don't know. I could do it in sandbox mode with the right settings, but then there's the other reason, the species cuts. Dino Dexit has impacted the non-dinosaur species pretty badly, especially the lagoon species, with the entire aquatic species pack being cut save one, as well as a lot of the default lagoon species. My goal with this park will be to get 25 species, which wouldn't be possible in JW3 even if you counted hybrids, which I will not be for the sake of this video. Even if they're not real dinosaurs, they're still made out of dino DNA, so that's a gray zone. Hopefully by the time I'm ready to do another one of these challenges, we'll have custom challenge mode in JW3, so I can start doing them there. But with all that out of the way, let's get into it. This is yet another challenge that I had to reset multiple times to get the settings just right. I think this challenge might be possible on default Jurassic difficulty settings, but you'll see what that would require very soon. Getting carnivore feeders by about the 1-star mark is critical for this challenge, so after tweaking the settings to my liking, we begin. I construct my operations buildings and take a look at the scientists on offer. Nothing too amazing, I'm really looking for scientists with cheaper expeditions and research as their traits, but in the early game you just have to take what you can get. We need a decent bit of logistics and genetics to research our first species and also get the expeditions out to get their fossils. Lystrosaurus has some weirdly expensive dig sites for what's such a small animal with a relatively low appeal. I have never understood why it costs so much, and it's often discouraged me from even getting this species in challenge mode. Having beaten the campaign of JW3, it seems like they really balanced out a lot of that game's economy in regards to how expensive certain dig sites ought to be. Same goes for the research, but hey, we'll get there when we get there. I built what's going to be one of our few non-aviary or lagoon habitats while waiting for the expeditions to complete. It's decently compact, but that'll actually work to our benefit later. Even in the later game, this exhibit will be instrumental to our success, and it's all thanks to these weird little pug sausages, our first animal, the Lystrosaurus. There are currently 4 recognized species of Lystrosaurus, and of those species, the one most likely represented in Jurassic World Dominion and the evolution games it features in is Lystrosaurus murray, the smallest of the 4 species at only 2 feet long. Meanwhile, the largest species of Lystrosaurus was about the size of a pygmy hippopotamus. Lystrosaurus predated the dinosaurs, living in the late Permian and early Triassic, and its fossils have been found worldwide, making it a very significant animal for not only surviving the Permian mass extinction event, but also helping to prove the theory of plate tectonics by demonstrating that the continents were once joined together. These guys weren't exactly paddling across the oceans with those stubby little legs after all, especially considering what was in the oceans at the time. Even if they have a face only a mother can love, we do now have animals in the park, so we can start getting guests in. So I start to place down our guest facilities, and this is where we have to get a little bit creative in order to boost our park park rating. See, in order to get access to aviaries and lagoons, we need to reach 2 stars. Lystrosaurus is the only species we can have in our park right now. In order to reach our next star, and only other non-aviary and lagoon species that will help us for that goal, we need 1 star. Once we do hit 2 stars, the entire world opens up for us. But until then, we're playing under very strict limitations with what we can add. So how can we raise appeal? Well, remember all the way back in our first challenge of this game, the captures only run? We used guest attractions in order to boost our appeal rating, and that ultimately won us the run. Well, after a bit of research, we can start placing down an innovation center and our first guest attraction, which increases the appeal of our park by a good amount, but not quite enough for what we need. I need a bit more logistics for the next step, and I even managed to find a scientist with cheaper expeditions, which is pretty huge. We then managed to reach half a star, which does unlock the next species we can use, but we can't actually get it yet because it's a carnivore and requires meat feeders. Now you might be thinking, well, if it's a carnivore, why not just feed the Lystrosaurus to it? To which I would say, how dare you, those are my babies. But also I would say, I tried it in a previous attempt and it's just a giant time and money sink. The Dimetrodon don't have any behaviors or animations for hunting and killing the Lystrosaurus, meaning you basically have to tranquilize the Lystrosaurus so that the Dimetrodon will kill them while they're unconscious. It's the only way they'll actually kill and eat them. Not to mention, every batch of 6 Lystrosaurus is about $500,000. That's a decent chunk of money that I can't afford to spend every time my Dimetrodon need to eat, which is pretty often. So we need a different strategy, or rather, the same strategy. If you liked the way my park looked up until this point, get ready because it's about to get a lot uglier and it's not gonna stop from there. I just start spamming as many attractions as I can fit into this stretch of path, getting as much appeal from them as humanly possible. Each attraction is worth about 100 appeal, which is as much as 2 Lystrosaurus without suffering from the species variety penalty, and I'm getting 7 of these things, so my overall appeal goes way up, especially when I add even more Lystrosaurus onto the pile. All in all, it's enough to get me up to 0.9 stars, just barely short of what I need. But I get started on setting up the Dimetrodon habitat anyway, and with a little bit of amenity configuration, we cross that threshold and get our first star. So after a few digs, I bring in our first batch of Dimetrodon to their new swampy home. Dimetrodon was a genus of synapsid from the early Permian, famous for the large sail on its back. So naturally it was named after its teeth of slightly different sizes. There's over a dozen species of Dimetrodon currently recognized, with the smallest species, Dimetrodon teutonus, being only about 2 feet long, about as big as a bearded dragon or an Ackie monitor, and the largest species, Dimetrodon angelensis, being bigger than most crocodile species at around 15 feet. Being a synapsid, this places Dimetrodon as being closer to mammals than it is to dinosaurs, and so a lot of speculation has been made about its life appearance, not only in regards to the structure of its sail, but also its integument. Some speculative reconstructions have depicted it as leathery or even with mammal-like hairs, but some very recent skin impressions have revealed that Dimetrodon had scales similar to modern-day reptiles. But not quite like the crocodile scutes seen on this model. I'm sorry, I still don't like those. Well, the new arrivals have their own problems to sort out, and I have mine. Even though Dimetrodon are a lot more popular than Lystrosaurus, we still need to get to 2 stars or else these are the only animals we'll have in the park until the end of time. The species roster in this game is great, but we really could have used some more terrestrial non-dinosaur species. I'd kill for a Saurosuchus or an Arizonasaurus or something. Luckily, the new additions are popular enough that they justify the creation of new Dimetrodon-themed amenities, like a taco shop with little Dimetrodon-shaped taco holders. That'd be real. That would exist if prehistoric theme parks were real. Put me on the marketing team. Though even once we get all those amenities in and fix up our transport rating with a zip line, we're still not nearly as close to 2 stars as I'd like to be. I throw in another hotel and some more Lystrosaurus, but all of my efforts only get me up to 1.5 stars before I get a suspicious subsidy event. Since your star rating in this game is based on your income per minute, I take it in the hope that it'll be enough to tip us over the edge. It helps a bit, but the fact that I still feel the need to spam more Lystrosaurus and even more Dimetrodon should say a lot about how comfortable I feel with this park's rating. I never got past this point in my other attempts, so I felt correct to be nervous. I eventually lose out on the subsidy money since I take too much time trying to get my shit together, so we're basically back at square one here. One of my scientists does get a passive boost in his stats, which is nice, but the salary increase is absolutely not worth it. Scientist wages are one of the biggest money sinks in challenge mode, and you'll soon see that treating our scientists like shit is pretty much the best way to move forward in this challenge. We've already fired some of the ones that had bad traits and potential, though as a result of that we do get a gate sabotage, but it's basically a joke since I can just delete the gate, and even then it's only the Lystrosaurus enclosure. I think anything bigger than a grasshopper is safe from those guys. Actually wait, apparently a handler got injured while releasing another batch of these things. Never mind, maybe they are dangerous. The frustrating thing is, there's nothing exactly wrong with my park, well aside from gross mistreatment of my staff, it's just that I've hit a bottleneck and can't progress further without more appeal. But I do have an idea that I've been saving in my back pocket for some time now. I've never needed to pull this trick out, but we're out of options here. I'm building a new enclosure here, but I thought I didn't have any more species to put in. That's right, I don't. But there's nothing stopping me from putting new exhibits with the same species in them. So we're setting up a second Dimetrodon habitat. Their appeal will still draw guests over, and that will create demand for amenities which make me money, and I love money. I also set up a tour going through the new enclosure, and trust me when I say this will also help us out immensely in the long run. I'm promising that a lot of stuff will matter here if you take my word for it. I feel like a politician. So we fly in the new boys, one of whom gets sick basically instantly. Bad water, I guess. And again, it does help, but we need a few more Dimetrodon to really round things out. I'm cooking up a batch when I need a bit of extra spending money, so I go to take a picture of some of the Lystrosaurus and make almost 200 grand. This is a huge influx of money all at once, all for taking a picture of what I thought would just be a big pile of goobers that I need to get up and running, but no. This herd of Lystrosaurus may not have cost much to make, but they're worth millions. It'll only get better from here. We also get a contract for a new tour ride, and the nice thing about these contracts is that you can just delete an existing tour ride, replace it, and make like 6 times what you spent on it. Same goes for the contracts that ask you to place down an amenity. The payout is so much higher than the cost. These contracts are another easily repeatable strategy that we'll be employing for the rest of the run whenever we need money, and arguably not even the best one we'll see. After widening our pass to increase park capacity, reconfiguring a new amenities, and adding in one more batch of Dimetrodon, we finally reach 2 stars with this ridiculous setup. Now is when the challenge really opens up. Unfortunately, just because we can finally unlock the aviaries and lagoons, that doesn't mean we have immediate access to them. I want a scientist with cheaper research, but I have to settle for someone with high welfare to unlock the new enclosures at all. I will need good welfare to get some of the bigger species incubated, so that's not a huge loss. Speaking of welfare, there's a minor tuberculosis outbreak, but with everything in the park being so centralized, it's not really a concern. The vet's able to take care of it all by himself. Once that's done, we begin construction of our first aviary section. I've gone with aviaries first since they're generally cheaper than lagoons in terms of both construction and stocking. Hell, even the research for the best pterosaurs is a lot cheaper than lagoon creatures with similar appeal ratings. Also, like I mentioned in a previous challenge, aviary and lagoon viewing galleries are for absolute suckers. That's $8 million that I do not have to waste for something that can very easily be replaced with basic viewing galleries and towers. The first person view is complete garbage, but it's all the same to the guests. Thank God they fixed the prices for these things in the 3rd game. I seriously can't wait to start doing challenges there. But viewing galleries are only good if there's something to view inside the gallery, and I'm very happy to finally introduce our first pterosaur into the park, actually into this whole series I'm just noticing, the Sungaripterus. Sungaripterus is a relatively small pterosaur from early Cretaceous China. It had a wingspan of about 10 feet and was only about 3 feet tall when standing. They come from a fairly small clade of pterosaurs named after Sungaripterus itself, and where exactly the family places within the broader clade of pterosaurs is still unclear. It's likely that Sungaripterus used its uniquely shaped beak and short flat teeth to dig through mud and crush hard-shell invertebrates like crustaceans and clams, making it roughly similar to modern-day shorebirds in terms of its ecology. Like many pterosaurs, Sungaripter's had a bony crest on its head that was almost certainly used for species identification and display purposes, much like the frills on the heads of ceratopsian dinosaurs. Though Sungaripter's skull hasn't been found in the most pristine condition, so the exact shape and form of the crest is unclear, especially when you take into account that these crests likely looked very different between the sexes. For anyone who's seen my Megapark videos, just know that I tried my best to make the aviaries pretty, but I'm working on a limited budget here. This will be especially clear for the lagoons, and with the ultimate placement of everything, this will probably end up being the ugliest park I've ever made. We're really waiting on the third game where decorations and terrain editing are completely free.
Dude, Pride rock!
But we've got no time to waste here. With one aviary in the park, it only makes sense to round things off with a lagoon to match it, so we send out some expeditions to get one of the few lagoon species we can actually afford. And it'll be a lot easier to afford with the best contract we get in this challenge: growing population. All this contract asks us to do is increase the amount of animals in our biggest species population, which happens to be Lystrosaurus, which is also the cheapest animal we can produce, which also means we'll get even more appeal from the herd and even more money whenever we snap a photo of the tall grass that enshrouds them, and the money we get out of doing this is way more than it costs to make the Lystrosaurus in the first place. This contract is one of our big money makers. I seriously think we couldn't have done this run without it. You can really see how it all comes together around these little goblins. Speaking of little goblins, there's a wild encounter we can actually take advantage of for the first time in this run. It's another small, unassuming, and this time frankly nasty looking pterosaur, but I'll gladly take it to get closer to our species goal. This does put my lagoon plans on hold for the time being, as I need to get a new aviary set up for our new arrivals, and unfortunately, every single aviary and lagoon requires their own permanent hatchery setup, which really eats into the funds of this run. But hey, that's nothing that another batch of Lystrosaurus won't fix. And after that, it doesn't take long for our new flock of Dimetrodon to get airlifted into their new home. This was a somewhat primitive, relatively small pterosaur from the early Jurassic, and it was also one of the first pterosaur species discovered, being found back in the 1800s when every pterosaur was lumped under the then wastebasket taxon of Pterodactylus. Unlike later pterosaurs, Dimetrodon had long tails and a shorter, more rounded head that held the two distinct kinds of teeth that it's named for. Examinations of those teeth suggest that this pterosaur was likely a predator of small vertebrates, and its body plan was actually not well suited for long periods of flight, meaning it may have had a similar niche to later Asdarchid pterosaurs like Ketzelcoatlus, though on a much smaller scale. I mostly spend a lot of time just trying to build up funds for the lagoon. Lots of pictures of Lystrosaurus to take. Eventually, I get everything set up. Now it's just time to add the new animal. But we're still low on funds, and now even our Lystrosaurus are starting to die off. This is just the part of the run that's a bit of a slump. I can only take so many pictures before the species variety penalty makes it not worth it anymore. Don't worry, this will get easier with time. In the background, I've basically been doing a bunch of junk expeditions to get extra materials to sell off. Super cheap trips like a Margosaurus to get me some really nice shark fossils to sell for major profit. And after what feels like way too long, everything is finally set up for our newest arrivals, a school of Dunkleosteus, who I forgot to randomize the skins for because I am an idiot. Dunkleosteus is without a doubt the most well-known fish from the Devonian era, an era that's been nicknamed the Era of Fish, so he's the fish of all fish. They're only known from fossil material of their heads, which were absolutely huge, as well as being armor-plated. Some fish today like Plecostomus have tough skin or armor, but it's nothing like what Dunkleosteus and its relatives, the placoderms, had, with placoderm literally meaning plate skin. Historically, Dunkleosteus was thought to be around the same size as, or even bigger than modern-day great white sharks in terms of length, but more recent estimates comparing it to other closely related placoderms have it at a much smaller and much more squat 15 feet or so at the biggest. Still a massive and dangerous fish, but nowhere near what's depicted in the game. With our 5th species now in the park, we are officially 1/5 of the way to our goal. Despite its massive size and impressive horrifyingness, Dunkleosteus actually has a surprisingly low appeal rating, which makes this less of an impactful addition than you might hope, especially for how costly it ended up being. I know Archelon is the species they use to basically be the mascot of the Marine Species Pack, but damn, I really feel like Dunkleosteus only has bad appeal because it's supposed to be accessible in the early game instead of due to its actual attributes. Though we do catch a lucky break since almost immediately after our dunks settle in, we get a notification for a capture of some Marodactylus. Cool, I don't even have those guys researched yet, that saves time. The team only manages to capture 2 out of the 6 they found, but hey, that's 2 more than I would normally have by this point. Send them in. Marodactylus was a pretty large pterosaur from the Romualdo Formation in Brazil, which is noteworthy for housing an astonishing number of well-preserved pterosaur fossils, and not much else outside of a handful of dinosaurs such as the Spinosaur Irritator, who even then was found with pterosaur remains in its stomach content, so there's still a bias here. Pterosaurs in general have very thin and delicate bones that don't frequently survive the fossilization process, so a formation that's almost exclusively pterosaurs, especially well-preserved ones, is a serious rarity. Marodactylus itself is honestly one of the less noteworthy pterosaurs, being known only from a skull that identifies it as an ananguera pterosaur, and the sister taxon to another pterosaur species we'll be seeing soon. Its species epithet was named in honor of Alexander Kellner, who is basically the world's leading researcher in terms of pterosaurs. And I think the scientists who named it chose Marodactylus in particular for that honor, because they weren't getting another chance anytime soon. He's been going around naming all the other pterosaurs himself. Look how many there are, holy! Even though I have Marodactylus now, if these die of old age, I won't have them in the future, so I'll need to research all the pterosaurs and lagoon species, but this is gonna cost a lot. The most expensive pterosaurs in the tree cost $1 million to research, and the most expensive lagoon species cost $4 million, and there's 2 of those nodes. For how many species I need, this is basically unavoidable, and I'm really wishing I had a scientist with cheaper research, but I decide to bite the bullet and research another branch of lagoon animals and a couple of pterosaur species I want to get as many as I can before I start going on expeditions, since some species have overlap with the same dig site and don't tell you that until after you either unlock them or deplete the site. Yet another annoyance that the third game thankfully addresses and fixes. With this being my first JW2 challenge since JW3 came out, there's so many quality of life fixes I'm missing from that game already. I miss my ignorance. Eventually, I rounded all the species from the Romualdo Formation, since that has the most concentrated pterosaur species in one area, as well as having some nice extra fossils and materials to sell on the side, which should hopefully make up for the hefty price tag of these species. Of course, immediately after all that, I find a scientist with cheaper research, but hey, better late than never. I'll still need him for those $4 million lagoon research price tags. I end up expanding the Dimetrodon aviary, don't laugh at the shape, because I plan on giving them a pretty special roommate soon who's gonna need the space. Turns out because the dig site that Ketzelcoatlus was found in was balanced for Alamosaurus, who came first in the DLC lineup, this site is actually surprisingly cheap for an animal with such a high appeal rating. We also get almost the entire genome after just one expedition, so it's a low price we only have to pay once. That's amazing. But what's this? The Ketz itself is still very expensive to incubate? This briefcase full of Lystrosaurus ought to put a stop to that. Actually, it won't. I need a lot more money, which means a lot more photos. Not to mention my Dimetrodon are starting to die off, which means I'll have to replace them soon, which costs me even more money. Why do I like management sim games? All they do is remind me of my life. Well, I save up as much as possible to finally get that Ketz egg cooking, and it took a while because my finances are honestly kind of pathetic, and I'm hoping this giant turkey will be worth it. Okay, yeah, seeing that exit animation is always worth it. When it was first discovered, Ketzelcoatlus stood out for not only its massive size compared to other pterosaurs, but also for the location it was discovered. Most pterosaurs are found in coastal deposits, but Ketzelcoatlus was found about 200 miles inland from the nearest coastline, in what is now Texas. This had scientists stumped for a while because it was pretty commonly accepted that most, if not all known pterosaurs were likely fish and insect eaters, but this thing was living way too far inland to be sustaining itself totally off of fish, and was way too big to be eating insects. So what was going on here? Well, initially it was thought that these were basically giant Cretaceous buzzards, flying around eating entirely carrion, while occasionally fishing when it suited them. But as more and more Asdarchid pterosaurs were found, a better idea of their ecology began to emerge, and it's now believed that Ketzelcoatlus and its relatives were terrestrial predators, primarily eating things like young dinosaurs. It wasn't nearly as oversized as it is in the game or the movie, but Ketzelcoatlus may just be the biggest animal that ever flew in the skies. Well, we've basically peaked as far as pterosaur appeal goes, even if there's a pterosaur design I like more in this game. But we're all about variety here, so we still need more species. And of course, a new star attraction means a new set of themed amenities. Ketzel's pretzels, anyone? I'm full of these. Also, now that we have the high value Ketz, we can take pictures of him alongside our Lystrosaurus to start racking up money a lot faster. And speaking of racking up money, look who decides to generously donate $2 million to me in exchange for an endangered species found on the site of my aviary expansion. I've been wondering how those guys are holding up.
You sons of a bitches! I've been running the numbers here, and I see you's joik spent another $2 million on some pet.
Don't look at me, boss. It was the new guy.
Yeah, what he said, the new guy. Oh, so the new guy's a wise guy, huh? I'll rough him up real good. Archie, what kind of shit you trying to pull spending our money on?
Is that a California condor? Oh my god, that's priceless.
Yeah, boss, priceless. We're set up for life now, huh?
Archie did good, didn't he, boss?
Yeah, I guess he did. Not bad, new guy. I also end up selling off a haul of fossils for another clean million, but unfortunately these were fossils I actually wanted. I wish this could have happened with one of my junk fossil expeditions, but I have to take what I can get. The goons really are pulling a fast one on me this time around, I gotta admit it. At the very least, the next dig goes smoothly, and with all this extra money, I'm actually able to research one of the high-tier lagoon nodes. And with the cheaper research scientist, I'm able to save over $1 million, which is just insane. Just by using this scientist, I'm already a quarter of the way to the other node. Unfortunately, I can't select the node until I meet the base requirements, even if I can make it cheaper. So we still have to save up, and we're gonna need as much money as possible for some of these dig sites I just unlocked. God damn. I want to use my cheaper research scientist as much as possible, and then hopefully replace him with a scientist with cheaper dig sites, which will cut the price for those in half. We're gonna end up firing a lot of people in this challenge. I'm making some serious enemies here. But I'm also making a lot of animals here, and after quite a few digs, we give our Marodactylus some roommates in the form of Sierradactylus. It's fitting that we have Sierradactylus and Marodactylus together, as these two are sister taxa, being more closely related to each other than any other species. Sierradactylus is not an especially well-known pterosaur, and its biggest claim to fame is being the pterosaur that was housed in Jurassic Park in the original novel. I'm sure Gregory S. Paul is also to blame for this like he is with Velociraptor, but maybe Crichton just felt like using a more obscure taxa, I don't know. That scene in the novel ended up being the inspiration for the pterosaur sequence in Jurassic Park 3, but the Sierradactylus were replaced with Pteranodon, which are a much better known pterosaur. The crest that Sierradactylus has in this game is purely speculative, since the back of this animal's head isn't known from any fossil material. But there are other crested ananguirrid pterosaurs, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. We're making some decent progress towards our goal here, and I even managed to find a scientist with the cheaper expedition trait that I need, though the rest of her stats aren't anything to write home about. But damn are the results worth it. The ordinarily pricey formation that houses Archelon and friends is now a mere $500,000 per trip. There's multiple species I need here, so I'll have to come back to this site frequently. I'll gladly take that. I'm saving a fortune right now. I can use that money I'm saving to restock my Lystrosaurus population, and then I get something really big. A group of Attenborosaurus have been spotted out in the wild. These are some of the most cost-efficient animals in the game for maximizing appeal, on top of being one of my favorite lagoon animal designs, so we've got to get these. So I get started on a new lagoon and airlift in the two new arrivals. And don't they look nice? While Attenborosaurus superficially resembles long-necked plesiosaurs, it's actually an early example of a pliosaurid, dating back to the early Jurassic. Pliosaurs are a type of plesiosaur, but they generally distinguish themselves by having larger heads and shorter necks. But Attenborosaurus was an early adopter of the lifestyle, so there was still a lot of room to grow. Speaking of growth, the game's depiction of the animal is pretty oversized, with the real Attenborosaurus only being about 14 feet long, while the game's version seems about as big as an Elasmosaurus. This animal was named after David Attenborough, the biologist, documentary narrator, and brother of Richard Attenborough, who played John Hammond in the original Jurassic Park. He also featured in a documentary where he talked about a completely different pliosaur than the one named after him. You'd think it would be this one, considering his name is in the title, but As wonderful as they are, only having 2 Attenborosaurus is a problem, as they're social animals and want at least 3 of their own kind to be 100% happy. This is a bit of a problem considering that the Attenborosaurus dig site is pretty damn expensive, on top of this being one of the species locked behind that second $4 million node. But we can get there later. For now, another one of my digs that I actually care about is getting interrupted by one of these goddamn events. No, I want to go to the Romualdo Formation to get pterosaurs. Get your own damn fossils. As if that wasn't enough, one of my goober-ass scientists gets injured on their PTO, and now they expect me to foot the bill for it. Do you understand that you dickwads are eating into 1/3 of my income by sitting around waiting for me to tell you what to do? What the hell were you even doing that caused you to get into so much medical trouble? Whatever, deal with it on your own. I'm gonna fire you soon anyway. Anyway, I boost up some of my existing populations and apparently do such a good job at it that I'm asked to do it even more for some fat stacks. Sure, but this ends up being even more lucrative than I ever could have imagined, as our goon friends apparently want to buy a cheap-ass Lystrosaurus egg for over $1 million.
Who wants omelets?
There is nothing that spamming a shitload of Lystrosaurus doesn't solve, apparently. I'm actually able to keep my finances in a pretty good place by managing to get lucky with one easy contract after another. And I mean that literally, it's the same easy contract. It's not quite at death spiral levels, but I am having a bit of a die-off, so I need to get some new blood into the park. It's even affecting the pterosaurs at this point. And sadly, it even extends to our first lagoon animals. We're gonna need some new dunks soon. We're also gonna need a really big toilet to flush this guy down. Why did that start, by the way? The flushing fish when they die thing? It's bad for the ecosystem and just a waste of water. I don't know why people don't just bury their fish or throw away the bodies. Fish make good fertilizer. It's just one of those things that was so normalized throughout my childhood that I never really questioned why it's a thing. Anyway, I'm finally able to get the last research node I need for every single lagoon and aviary species, meaning I no longer need the cheaper research trait and can look for something better. Congratulations, cheaper research scientist. You get 52 weeks of the year off now. I'm such a good boss. Once I escort the crybaby off the premises, I bring in a new batch of dunks to replace the old ones. I'm making sure everything has the long-lived trait from now on so I don't have to worry about replacing things nearly as often. I've also found a potential replacement scientist, but I need a bit more cash. Spend money to save money, I guess. Well, more Lystrosaurus, more money. I ain't complaining. Those and a few more nice pricey Ketz picks and an amenity contract are enough to fund a new flock of Marodactylus, as well as a few expeditions to get some real money makers into the park. Being able to cut expedition prices in half with these scientists is huge for my finances. And that's good because my Dimetrodon populations are looking pretty dire right now. I've only got 4 left across their 2 exhibits, but I get a new batch of 6 in there to bolster their populations not long after. I've also got a serious stockpile of fossils now that expeditions are so much cheaper. I'm absolutely swimming in pterosaur fossils. Enough that I'm able to add some little guys to the park, a flock of my absolute favorite funny bats, the Liopleurodon. While not actually being bats, Liopleurodon and its relatives, the Anurognathids, very likely held the same niche as modern-day bats during the Mesozoic. These tiny pterosaurs were roughly the same size as bats and had massive eyes and tiny needle-like teeth, likely used for seeing in low light levels and catching insects. Liopleurodon in particular is one of the largest known Anurognathids, which isn't saying much at all considering it's about the size of a pigeon. It's known for one of the best preserved pterosaur fossils of all time, with not only a fully articulated skeleton, but also wing tissue and the reason it was put into the feathered species pack, a covering of pycnofibers. Pycnofibers are really just a fancy term for feathers unique to pterosaurs specifically. Morphologically, there's really nothing to distinguish them from feathers found on dinosaurs, including birds. With pterosaurs already not fossilizing very well, getting a fossil this well preserved that also preserves the integument is nothing short of miraculous. Also, they're very cute and have a funny little face, and I love them. From one of the smallest animals in the game, I start to put some work into getting one of the biggest. Our park could use some more lagoons, so I put the work in to start digging for Megalodon fossils. Not only is the dig site expensive, but the fossils take a lot of extraction slots, so it takes a while to turn my hull into usable DNA. In the meantime, I finally get my old Attenborosaurus some much needed and very popular friends, though I do need to expand their lagoon in order to keep them happy, but that's a small price to pay. I've got plenty of space. My pterosaurs do get a bit sick from some bad fish, haven't we all? And speaking of fish, I'm setting up another lagoon over by the Ketz Aviary, but not quite for Megalodon yet. I want to stick some Plesiosaurus in with the Attenborosaurus since they'll get along and it'll make for more profitable pictures. And there's another, less cohabitable species in this dig site that I may as well get to. Now that all the research is out of the way, a lot of what I'm doing at this point is just digging up fossils, so this bit takes a little while, especially with random events slowing my progress. I'm trying to get a good look at my amenity placement to see if I can optimize them better, when I suddenly get the notification that my Ketz has broken out of its aviary. Yeah, it did the bug where it got stuck in place earlier, so when I reset the park to fix that, its territory shrunk to the point where it felt the need to escape. And the worst part of this whole thing is that I don't have the necessary tranquilizer level to contain it. I never thought I'd need it. Half the animals in this park can't even escape to begin with. So now I'm scrambling to get the research I need done quickly as this giant fluffy Aztec god of death is flying around eating my guests. You put pterosaurs in your park one time and this is what happens. But as things get even more chaotic and even more people get devoured, I come to a harrowing realization. The escaped Ketz has lowered my star rating so badly, I can't even research the dart level required to contain it anymore. I'm straight up soft locked unless this thing keels over from old age immediately. I have no choice but to reload my most recent save and try to prevent this from happening again. Thankfully, a little bit of terrain micromanagement is all it takes to calm him down, but man, that was a close call, all because of a damn bug. After a seriously long time just going on expeditions, I managed to get all the genome I need for the rest of the run, and can get rid of the expedition specialist scientist, in exchange for ones that will make synthesizing and incubating new species a lot easier. I don't think I've ever min-maxed this hard with my scientists while playing this game before, but the start of this challenge in particular made it feel necessary. But after a very long time, we can finally introduce a new lagoon species to the park. And as critical as I am of this design, I have to say this exit animation is still pretty damn cool. Liopleurodon has been steeped in contention ever since its discovery. It started off as what's known as a tooth taxa, which is to say an animal that's only known from fossilized teeth and not the rest of it. This is how it ended up with the name smooth-sided teeth instead of something like giant-headed flipper demon. Eventually, a lot more material was found, enough to give it a neotype that all future Liopleurodon fossils would be compared to, but some material would end up giving this animal quite the reputation. Enormous vertebrae were found that were originally attributed to a giant pliosaur, which led to the depiction of the 80-foot-long monster Liopleurodon seen in Walking with Dinosaurs. However, those vertebrae were eventually found to belong to a sauropod, and maximum estimates of Liopleurodon's size were dropped to around 20 to 30 feet. So even if it wasn't an honest-to-god kaiju, these things were still as big as your average killer whale. At the very least, we can always rely on one depiction of Liopleurodon to be accurate, as they will indeed lead you to Candy Mountain if given the opportunity. With that lagoon filled, the additional expansions to the new populated areas of the park are enough to bring us up to 3 stars, if only for a brief moment before we suffer a pretty serious loss in the form of our senior citizen Ketz dying of old age. Luckily, I checked his age beforehand and had the foresight to start cooking up another one before this happened, so it's not all that terrible a loss. With nothing left to do but expand, I get to work on a brand new aviary and even start putting a tour through it, and the Marodactylus and Sierradactylus aviary as well. I've got big plans for this aviary, and decide to put my favorite big pterosaur in it, and I welcome in a pair of Thanatosdracon. And I figured they could use some roommates, and throw in some Pteranodon as well to really help fill out the aviary. Much like Ketzelcoatlus, Thanatosdracon was a huge Asdarchid pterosaur, and likely had a similar lifestyle of primarily hunting terrestrial prey on the ground. Most Asdarchids are known from very fragmentary material. Beak fragments, neck fragments, wing fragments, lot of fragments. Thanatos dracon is actually something of an exception to this, but considering it's missing its entire head and neck, you gotta understand that we're grading on a curve here. These would have been huge animals, 13 feet tall when standing, which is about the same height as a modern day giraffe. Yet despite this, they were so lightly built they only would have weighed a few hundred pounds. If this thing killed you, it probably wouldn't even eat all of you. So that'd be a pretty horrible way to die. Pretty fitting for an animal named the Dragon of Death. Pteranodon wasn't quite as large as the Asdarca pterosaurs it shared the Cretaceous skies with, but it was still a pretty huge pterosaur, with a wingspan of up to 20 feet, though female pteranodons were much smaller. In fact, this is one of the few prehistoric species with direct fossil evidence of sexual dimorphism, with male pteranodons being not only larger in size, but also having longer, more elaborate head crests, while the crests of females were much smaller. Their fossils have been found in what was once the Western Interior Seaway that spanned across Midwest North America and the late Cretaceous, meaning these were coastal animals that likely dove into the water to feed on fish. It was initially thought that fish-eating pterosaurs may have been skim feeders, but not only are the only modern-day skim-feeding birds, weird, but more recent studies suggest that pterosaurs could actually swim quite well, hopefully fast enough to avoid all the horrifying predators in the late Cretaceous seas. In Jurassic Park 3, as well as in a lot of toys, Pteranodon are depicted as having teeth, despite the fact that their name literally means toothless wing. However, there is an Ananguera pterosaur named Ludodactylus, literally toy wing, that has a very similar head crest to Pteranodon, as well as rows of sharp teeth. Maybe that's what they cloned on Isla Sorna. With all of my digging and research done, pretty much all there is left to do is expand the park. I've got all the DNA I could ever need for any species I want. Some of those expansions come in the form of expanding already existing habitats, as I've finally gotten the Plesiosaurus in with their Attenborosaurus roommates. The Plesiosaurus are getting along great with each other, as you can see, and I sent out a team to go catch some wild pteranodons and bring them to their new home, even if they end up being the ugly-ass Jurassic World ones. Plesiosaurus was one of the first so-called antediluvian reptiles that was discovered by Mary Anning back in the early days of paleontology. Antediluvian literally meaning before the flood, referring to Noah's flood in the Bible. Back then, the literal words of the Bible were essentially treated as fact and history compared to today, where a lot of branches of Christianity lean towards a more interpretive and metaphorical approach to events like Noah's flood and Genesis. This is important because when the first fossils of animals like Plesiosaurus were discovered, they didn't resemble anything alive today, and there was absolutely no precedent for this at all. The concept of natural extinction not caused by humans was unheard of. So when scientists had to figure out when exactly these creatures came from, they concluded that they lived up until the Great Flood, at which point they were all wiped out, leaving only those on Noah's Ark to survive. In reality, Plesiosaurus lived in the early Jurassic in what is now modern-day Europe, which was mostly underwater at the time outside of a small chain of islands, and it lives a totally aquatic life, primarily feeding on shellfish. I once again have to revitalize my Dimetrodon populations after spending so long on my optimizations, but the good part of that is for basically every animal I get from here on out, I won't have to worry about them dying off before I can get this park done. The combination of Lystrosaurus and Plesiosaur photos together also makes me a pretty substantial amount of cash in mere seconds, more than enough to also give a boost to my Sierradactylus populations. I'll have to do the same for my Attenborosaurus too, as when I'm building up my next lagoon, one of our first ones ends up dying on me. After a few more sailed synapsids, Plesiosaur pictures, and little Lystrosaurus for a cromulent contract, I start getting some work done on a highly anticipated new lagoon area. Although synthesizing and incubating these things are by no means a quick or cheap process. As I'm working on getting one of the biggest animals, I get a call for one of the smallest out in the wild. Sure, I'll take some more funny bats, and not a moment too soon as some of mine are starting to die off. They're not the only ones dying off though, and it's a bit difficult to save up money for the big shark when I also have to funnel money into my dying species. But after a few more highly profitable pictures, we're able to incubate and release everyone's favorite big fish, the Megalodon. I never get tired of this guy, he's so cool. Megalodon is actually the species epithet of the biggest shark that's ever lived, who has been something of a nightmare to place taxonomically. The actual genus name Megalodon belongs to a notably toothless clam. Originally, this shark was known as Carcharodon megalodon, sharing the same genus as the modern-day great white shark, but then it gained its own unique genus of Carcharocles, before being lumped into the larger existing genus of Otodus. For most of its existence, Megalodon has only been known from fossilized teeth, which are quite common all over the world and can reach massive sizes up to 7 inches long. I have one that's about 3 inches long, which is perfectly average and does the job just fine. Megalodon's constantly shifting taxonomy has made judging its size based on the teeth alone a very difficult task. But with the discovery of megalodon vertebrae, a size range of 60 to potentially up to 80 feet in length is possible. These sharks lived for about 20 million years, and died out in the early Pliocene about 3.5 million years ago. Some people think that Megalodon still exists today, but it's impossible for that to be the case. Megalodon lived in shallow coastal waters, the kind that the vast majority of Earth's population lives around, and ate whales for the bulk of its diet. And despite the fact that humans were hunting what would have been the primary food source for these hypothetical late surviving Megalodon to the point where said food source almost went extinct itself, no records of a giant monster-sized shark exist, nor of whale carcasses that were the victims of said giant shark. That's not gonna convince the especially stubborn or stupid, though.
The shark, which was dramatically stranded far from its home, lies on its back on the beach.
They're toys! I can see like the little fins curling up. It is plastic. Look at these little holes in the sand here. Those are from like sand crabs and clams and stuff. They're toys! As soon as we get our Mega Boy in, we get yet another call for more Liopleurodon. This place is getting popular. I guess they want to see the new attraction. Can't say I blame them. The guests want to see it too, and they also want some Megalodon-themed amenities. Megalodonuts maybe. I've still got it, dude. Liopleurodon aren't the only new Pterosaur additions. We need more Dimetrodon and more Sungaripterus since the old populations are dying off. And they're not the only ones. All over the park, these animals are dropping like flies. Oh, dude, right in the feeder? That's gotta be a party foul. I take a look at the pterosaurs I have left to see which ones will get along with each other. I only need about 10 more species in the park to win, so getting that last handful of pterosaur species comfortable is my top priority. So after building up another new aviary, and sending out a new group of Attenborosaurus who I immediately take even more pictures of, I stock our new aviary with a couple of brand new species, the Geosternbergia and the Tropiognathus. Geosternbergia is very likely to simply be another species of Pteranodon rather than its own genus. However, Alexander Kellner, I'm telling you, his name came up a lot in my research, does believe it to be its own genus. In fact, one with 2 species. Considering everything that happened recently with Nanotyrannus being validated as its own genus, I'm willing to believe that the same could be true for Geosternbergia. I trust the guy who's done like 90% of pterosaur research ever on this one. The main difference between this and the much more definitively Pteranodon Longiceps, is the shape of the crest, with Longiceps having the classic backwards pointing crest, while Geosternbergia has a much taller, wider crest. I always thought Geosternbergia's crest looked way cooler personally, so whether or not it ends up being its own genus, it's still one of my favorites. Also, any fans of Disney's Dinosaur in the audience will recognize this as the pterosaur that picked up Aladar's egg and carried it to the island with the love monkey.
Ow, baby!
In life, he was the most magnificent beast ever to take to the wing. He ruled the sky supreme, flying far and wide over the lands of the dinosaurs. Tropiognathus was one of the largest and most impressive of the non-Asdarchid pterosaurs. Its wingspan was over 26 feet in length, and it could stand almost as tall as a man. Much like Liopleurodon, it was depicted in Walking with Dinosaurs as being much larger than it was in life, while also going under a different name as Ornithochirus. This is because Ornithochirus was known from fragmentary remains in Europe, while Tropiognathus is known from South American material. And there was a lot of back and forth on whether or not Tropiognathus and Ornithochirus were one and the same. Like many ananguarid pterosaurs, Tropiognathus possessed a pair of crests on the tip of its beak, giving it a rounded appearance. It's likely that, as is the case with most pterosaur headgear, this was used for sexual display purposes, for the lucky ones at least. With our park now at 4 stars, I work on bringing in some of the big guns. The goons aren't the only ones allowed to have a money-printing turtle. I also briefly considered decorating one of the lagoons for the most mild of visual intrigue, before I realized how unnecessarily expensive kelp is. I once again apologize for how butt-ugly this park is. They'll look a lot better in the 3rd game, trust me. Sadly, missing from the 3rd game is our pair of very pretty giant turtles, ready to make their home in our new lagoon. But the new species spam doesn't stop there, as immediately afterwards, we also get a notification for wild Tapejara. I've been putting these guys off for a while, but I think I just have to hope that they'll get along with the Kets and the Dimorphodon in what space they have, which does seem to be the case after adding a few trees. But we're still not done yet, as after getting some frankly ridiculous plesiosaur pictures, we can add yet another plesiosaur to the roster, and give our Archelon some roommates with some Styxosaurus, as well as some Ichthyosaurus. Despite being the largest turtle known, Archelon's armor by no means made it invincible. It shared its home with some of the most dangerous animals the ocean has ever seen, and just about everything would have been dangerous to it during its life stages. 6-foot-long seabirds would have eaten hatchlings, giant fish and sharks would have snacked on juveniles, and even adults likely wouldn't be safe from the several different kinds of giant mosasaurs that patrolled the western interior seaway. Basically, if you thought that those poor baby sea turtles in nature documentaries have it tough, Archelon is like their grandpa who had to walk uphill both ways to get to school. Tapejara in this game is actually based on another kind of Tapejara pterosaur from the same time and formation, known as Tupandactylus. Compared to other pterosaurs who had long, pointed beaks, these were downright bizarre. They had much smaller beaks and huge, tall crests on their heads, with the crest on the largest Tupandactylus species being almost comically oversized. Not only were they huge, they also would have been decorated. Filaments preserved in a Tupandactylus skull reveal that the crest would have been covered in multiple different kinds of pycnofibers, likely consisting of different colors, and with some of them being extremely close to dinosaur feathers. Tapejara, while still having a large crest, wasn't nearly as outlandish as Tupandactylus, and probably would have looked like a modern-day cock of the rock. Don't laugh, that's just what they're called. And their diet likely would have been similar too, with it being widely accepted that Tapejarids were using their short beaks not to eat fish, but rather fruits, making them one of the few known herbivorous pterosaurs. Not that that's portrayed in the game at all. Styxosaurus is an elasmosaurid very closely related to Elasmosaurus itself, and it lived in about the same place across a longer period of time. In terms of their body plan, the biggest difference between the two is that Elasmosaurus had a longer neck with more vertebrae in it. Otherwise, they were very similar. In the game, Styxosaurus is depicted as having a sail-like structure of soft tissue on its neck that can even utilize bioluminescence for display. There's no evidence that this would have been the case, as bioluminescence has never been documented in any reptile before, although recently hawksbill sea turtles were discovered to be biofluorescent, which is similar but meaningfully distinct. Think bioluminescence as being glowy, while biofluorescence is reflective. It's certainly possible that plesiosaurs may have used their long necks as display structures, but soft tissue and colors rarely fossilize, so that remains to be definitively seen. Though recent studies show that cold water plesiosaurs likely would have been covered in a layer of blubber like modern-day whales. Ichthyosaurus were dolphin-like, fully aquatic reptiles from the early Jurassic, with large eyes and paddle-like flippers on a streamlined body. These animals and their relatives may have been nocturnal or deep divers, using their large eyes to hunt for fish and squid in low-light conditions. This animal was the first full fossil to be discovered by Mary Anning, a young woman from the UK who's basically the godmother of paleontology. She was a talented fossil collector even when she was a child, and even ran a shop selling fossils. However, because Anning was a woman and one of modest upbringing, she was never really accepted into the scientific community despite her numerous important discoveries, and the scientists writing the papers on Anning's findings would rarely even so much as mention her name. Today, Anning is looked back on with much more reverence than she received in her own time, and very fittingly in 2015, a new species of Ichthyosaurus was named in her honor. I hate to say it, but I think I may have optimized things to the point where there's not a whole hell of a lot to talk about in the challenge at this point. Certainly a far cry from the first run we did, but now it feels like going through a loop. Breed some Lystrosaurus, get a shit zillion dollars from it, take some new pictures, revitalize dying populations, get some captures, and ultimately add another new species when all of the busy work is taken care of. It really seems like it's just a matter of adding those last few species in. I almost wish there was some other external factor I could have added like storms, but that would have made the beginning of this run intolerable. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation. Either the beginning of the run is terrible or the end of the run is a cakewalk. Granted, it's not entirely smooth sailing. A couple of the Ichthyosaurus have some detrimental traits, so as I'm spamming down a bunch of lagoons to put in the last few species, I basically have to give them their own because apparently the adorable reptilian dolphins who get along with everything that doesn't eat them can just decide, fuck you, you're not my friends. Racism persists even in the Mesozoic. Of all the species in this park I expected to be a problem child, these guys certainly weren't at the top of my list. But outside of that, the rest of this challenge is pretty easy going. Over the course of the next 45 or so minutes, I give the Archelon and Styxosaurus new roommates in the form of Elasmosaurus, who are not antisocial assholes. I end up needing to put increasingly optimized amenities in increasingly tight-knit places in order to keep my guests happy. I save up enough money to cook up a Mosasaurus, which I put in the largest of our new lagoons, and I add the final pterosaur in the game to our Marodactylus aviary, because it wasn't crowded enough with only 2 species in there already. Elasmosaurus is one of the largest known long-necked plesiosaurs, and is often used as the basis for depictions of the Loch Ness Monster. Even in Zoo Tycoon 1, the Loch Ness Monster is basically just a big purple Elasmosaurus. Of course, Elasmosaurus never even lasted until the end of the Cretaceous period, dying out around 77 million years ago, and the remaining Elasmosaurs and all other plesiosaurs died out at the end of the Cretaceous with all the non-avian dinosaurs. Many depictions of the Loch Ness Monster also show it craning its neck out of the water, but it's now believed that real plesiosaurs would have had much more limited neck mobility, calling into question the function of such a long neck, which remains a mystery to this day. While Elasmosaurus was a marine animal unlike the lake-dwelling monster, recent discoveries have shown that there were indeed freshwater plesiosaurs and even mosasaurs. Though nothing in the lakes of Scotland. Yet. Mosasaurus is one of the largest and most well-known of the mosasaurs, a clade of reptiles that diverge from the close relatives of snakes and monitor lizards to become fully aquatic behemoths, and the apex predators of the late Cretaceous oceans. Mosasaurus is also one of the earliest vertebrate fossils ever discovered, with the first fossils being found in the mid-1700s, over 30 years before Mary Anning was even born. While not nearly on the same level as the kaiju-sized depiction in the Jurassic World movies, this was a huge animal, with some estimates going up to 56 feet in length, longer than the biggest predatory dinosaurs. If their modern-day monitor lizard relatives are anything to go by, they wouldn't have been especially polite or picky eaters either, and they likely would have eaten anything they could get their teeth on. The final pterosaur in the game is Barbarodactylus, a nyctosaurid pterosaur from Morocco in Africa. It's one of the largest known nyctosaurids, though with a wingspan of 13 feet, it's quite a bit smaller than most Asdarchids or even Pteranodon. This is a group of pterosaurs most noteworthy for their large, elaborate head crests that look almost like giant weather vanes. It's been debated on whether or not these structures would have had skin coverings on them, or whether they would have been more like deer antlers, with no clear consensus on what the more likely option is. Either way, I can only imagine these structures would have been a lot more of a detriment than a help for flying. This game's depiction covers the crest in skin, but the depiction in Prehistoric Planet gives them a more classic nyctosaur crest. It also made them gay! With this, we're at 4.8 stars and 1 species away from victory, so I decide to make it a special one. With no pterosaurs left to even use, I build one final lagoon, and optimize the infrastructure of my park as much as I can, with one more terrifying zipline straight over the Mosasaurus Lagoon. Better hope the restraints work for your lizard food, and you do not want to be lizard food. I actually start to panic a bit as right towards the finish line, I inexplicably drop into the red, and I still have no idea why that even happened. It's thankfully nothing a good picture can't fix, as the game realizes, hey, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be rich, but that was seriously weird. Regardless, after an expensive and lengthy incubation, I bring in the final animal, my favorite marine reptile in the game, the Kronosaurus. Kronosaurus was among the largest and last of the pliosaurs, living in what is now modern-day Australia. I'm sure if it was still around today, Australia and the people living there would be exactly the same, and Steve Irwin totally would have wrestled with one. It's named after the mythological Greek titan Kronos, who's noteworthy for the time he devoured his own children, as one does in ancient Greek times. And this is relevant to Kronosaurus, as there is fossil evidence of a juvenile Kronosaurus with bite marks from an adult of the same species. Cannibalism is extremely common among carnivores, but it's a happy coincidence that a prehistoric animal named after a cannibal gets to live up to its absolutely horrifying name. As soon as the Kronosaurus establishes itself in its new home, that instantly bumps us up to 5 stars and completes the challenge. Not a single dinosaur in sight, and we've made a 5-star park. At least financially. Visually, this place is a nightmare. A little bit rushed for the ending, Yeah, for sure, but this video is already long enough without me having to go into detail about every single little picture I took or contract I completed to get the money for each new species. Progress was steady at the end, but sadly not especially interesting. I think this run was definitely at its most interesting and tactical at the beginning, but being tactical felt less necessary as the challenge went on, except for the sake of simply getting it done faster. Optimizing the scientists to save as much money as possible was an interesting change of pace, even if I probably ended up being the boss from hell by the end of this. The lack of possible escapes didn't exactly help the end of this challenge either. Our first catch was the closest we ever got to a real terror, and we had to unexist his killing spree from this timeline. But even if we didn't get the most satisfying ending, it's good to know that we're not the only ones who managed to benefit from the Archelon meta.
Well, new guy, with that condor we sold on the black market and all those pictures we took, you've made us the richest goons this side of the Mississippi.
Archie did good, huh, boss?
Yeah, he did. You done a good one by us, so we're gonna do a good one by you. You're free, Archie. You can go back home to the sea, find your family, live a good life. Yeah. What he said.
We're gonna miss you, Archie. Archie, you came back.
What are you doing, Archie? Archie, what's the matter with you? Don't you want to go home?
Archie is with friends. Archie is home.